From a distance, graceful and gentle as a cloud. Close up, a deadly and uncontrollable mass of snow. It's called the White Death. A cold and deadly reminder of the savage power of our raging planet. An avalanche breaks the peace of a mountain wilderness. Deceptively slow, it appears even graceful, its incredible power concealed by a gentle cloud of snow. But not all avalanches are falling snow. Sometimes mountains themselves move downhill. Rock slides can bring down millions of tons of material, changing the landscape forever. Where there are mountains and snow, there are avalanches. Without people, they pose no danger. But for thousands of years, we've fought to tame the mountains, for survival, travel, work, and more recently for sport. All the skiers you will see caught in avalanches during this program survive, but most die of suffocation. When the avalanche slows down and stops, its victims are often buried beneath the surface. Escape is virtually impossible. This was the experience of Tim Auger in a freak climbing accident. A simple slip caused Tim and his partner to fall 2,000 feet over a cliff. He was saved from certain happening on a steep, soft snow slope.
It has the properties of a fluid, and you're moving in almost a water-like substantive way. The moment it comes to rest, everything tightens up. It's like body armor, but the body armor is all welded so that you couldn't move. It's hopeless if you're alone. Anybody who's buried in a slide realizes that there's just no chance of getting yourself out.
Half of all victims buried in snow are dead from lack of oxygen. After 3 hours, only 1 in 10 survive.
Let's get together. We're gonna have to do a transceiver search. Now get out your transceiver.
The best hope lies in these radio beacons. Most experienced skiers and hikers carry them. They normally transmit a weak radio signal. But after an avalanche, the searchers can switch them over to receive the signal from the beacon of anyone buried in the snow. The search must be slow and methodical, yet all the time the victim may be dying, buried just yards away from the rescuers, and perhaps only a foot below the surface.
I got a signal, Mark. Come on down. I found him. Where is he? Right in this area. Get the probe ready. So can you try probing in here? Go in there? No, nothing there. Okay.
Even if the buried person can breathe at first, their warm breath begins to freeze on the snow around the face, forming a mask of ice that makes breathing impossible.
We got him! There he is! Try and breathe there, Rob! Hey, Rob! How's your arm? And you're over the rest of them. All right, great. Oh, man, it's good to see you. See you too. All right.
Avalanches continue to kill even after the victims are rescued. Hypothermia, shock, or internal injuries make it vital to get them off the mountain as quickly as possible. The body core, the chest, and abdomen must be warmed up first and kept warm. Only then can it be warm enough for the very cold flight off the mountain. all its deadly power, an avalanche is one of nature's simplest forces. As snowflakes fall on the mountainside, they stick together. Layers of snow build up. There's another force at work, gravity. When the pull of gravity becomes greater than the force on the snow layers, they're still very hard to predict. They depend on the amount of snow, the terrain, and the weather. Understanding these intricacies is a highly skilled business. There are 3 distinct types of avalanche, each one of them lethal. The largest and most destructive is the powder avalanche. A piece of falling ice or rock starts a mass of loose snow sliding down the mountain. As it travels, it picks up more and more snow. Within a few seconds, a huge cloud of snow, ice, and air is hurtling down at up to 200 miles per hour. The avalanche still had so much energy that it surged several hundred feet up the other side of the valley before it finally came to rest. The size and speed of a powder avalanche and killing anyone in its path. The second type is called the wet avalanche. These mostly occur late in the snow season, when the snowpack is deep and the thaw is just beginning. Sometimes in these wet avalanches, the snow can flow like water. Other wet avalanches move so slowly they appear a little more than a soft trickle, but they are nonetheless deadly. Wet avalanches can be massive. Sometimes a whole mountainside of snow gives way. When it does, the power is overwhelming. In the Norwegian village of Odda in 1993, this avalanche slid down at just 5 miles per hour. The people had plenty of time to escape. Yet they could do nothing at all to prevent the avalanche engulfing their homes. But the third type, the slab avalanche, is the real killer. Just the weight of a skier can be enough to break an entire slab of snow away from the layers beneath. As the chunks break up, the pieces move more fluidly against each other, and the avalanche accelerates faster than ever. What started as a gentle snowflake has now become a lethal force. The lure of the mountains is irresistible. Every year people go further into the wilderness, seeking new peaks to climb or new slopes to ski. And every year, the mountains take their toll. The apparent tranquility is deceptive and become a victim. Dundas was with a party of highly experienced skiers on a backcountry trip in the Canadian Rockies.
It was a beautiful day. It snowed a couple inches the night before. There was not a cloud in sight. It was just around zero. So we hiked up the ridge, and then from there the avalanche.
The slope had looked perfect, but what none of the skiers could see was a weak layer beneath the surface, a deadly trap. This is a common story. Most of the avalanches that kill people are caused by people. In Julia's case, one of the skiers on the slope above her triggered a slide, sending a violent mass of snow cascading down towards her.
I just heard someone yelling, avalanche. I was pretty far away, and it was just, they yelled, and I look up and I saw everything coming down. It's like a big wave. 2 seconds, it just took me by surprise. It was just so fast. It's huge force. You're just stuck in the middle. It's all white. And it's just like being in the water. It's just struggle, but there's no way. I felt the snow whoop over me. It just packed me right in, and it was like being stuck in cement. And it was right up to my face and everything. And I remember trying to breathe, and there was nothing there. And I first started screaming, and I thought, just wait for a minute till it's settled, and you think that they're getting closer, and then I just blacked out.
These three escaped almost certain death by skiing across the slide to stable snow. By the time they reached safety, the slab was already traveling at more than 80 miles an hour. The skiers were lucky. It's avalanches this powerful that originally gave them the name the White Death. This avalanche ran for over a mile down the mountain, with a new surge of snow pushing it further downslope every time it appeared ready to stop. In the steep mountains of the European Alps, people have lived with the White Death for thousands of years. There are more than 100,000 avalanches here every year in what is the most densely populated mountain region in the world. The consequence is inevitable. In the winter of 1951, there were record amounts of snow and wind. Avalanches swept down on many towns and villages, burying and destroying property, livestock, and people. In that one winter, nearly 100 people died in Switzerland alone. But avalanche deaths were first recorded here more than 2,000 years ago, when Hannibal led his army on its epic crossing of the mountains as he marched on Rome. History records that avalanches killed 18,000 of his men during the crossing. But even that figure pales in comparison to the deaths here during the First World War. In 1916, Austrian and Italian soldiers fighting in the Alps aimed their cannons at the mountaintops instead of each other, triggering avalanches that overwhelmed the enemy positions. It was a bizarre but highly effective method of warfare. In that single winter, almost 80,000 troops from both countries were killed by the lethal force of the White Death. The bodies of most were never recovered. It's hard to believe that the horrendous power of an avalanche comes from nothing more than tiny snowflakes. Countless billions of them that fall and form layer upon layer of snow on the mountain slopes. Snow is one of the most complex materials found in nature. All snow crystals are just frozen water, but their shape and size are highly variable, depending on the weather conditions as they fall. The classic Christmas card snowflake has a beautiful six-sided symmetry, and it's true that no two snowflakes are exactly alike. Even after they've fallen, snow crystals continue to change. The wind can break large, delicate crystals into smaller, compact types. Over time, the crystals in some layers become almost solid, densely packed and interlocked. Some weather conditions produce feathery snow crystals, called surface hoar. When these are buried by the new snow, they break apart and form a very weak layer. It's a killer. A slab of dense snow above can slide over this layer as though on ball bearings. Surface hoar is not the only kind of weak layer that develops. Too much sun, too much wind, or rapidly changing temperatures can all create weak layers. The only common factor is the weather. Mountain regions create their own weather, and in winter, that means snow. With the snow comes wind. It strips the snow from the windward slopes and dumps it on the leeward slopes, building drifts and layers. Wind can create a rock-hard layer which then acts as a sliding surface when more snow falls. Wind can also blow snow into a huge dense drift or cornice on the crest of a ridge. These build up during the winter and by early spring can weigh thousands of tons. If a cornice grows too large to support its own weight, it may collapse, triggering a huge avalanche. For those people whose job it is to save lives by forecasting avalanches, monitoring weather conditions is vital. In many mountain regions of North America and Canada, there are networks of remote weather stations, situated high in areas where avalanches are common. These stations measure wind speed, temperature, snowfall, and send the data back by radio to monitoring stations in the towns below. These remote sites exposed to the fierce winter elements must be checked regularly to make sure the equipment is all working properly. But it's well worth the effort. With the new technology, forecasters can wake up in the morning and with only a laptop computer and a telephone, find out in a few seconds exactly what the weather conditions are in the mountains. To produce a real threat of avalanches, a mountain must satisfy a number of conditions. First, it must be high enough to produce a deep snow cover. High mountains also mean fewer trees, because avalanches start much more easily above the tree line. Forests anchor the snowpack, making it hard for the snow to slide. Of course, once an avalanche has got underway, trees are no protection at all. The angle of the slope is also critical. Too steep, and the snow layers fall off before they can build a slab. Too shallow, and the slab won't detach. Most avalanches occur on slopes of between 30 and 45 degrees. Unfortunately, this is also perfect for the most exciting skiing. The weight of a single skier can be enough to set a whole mountainside of snow moving. But even a shallow slope angle isn't always safe. This man was driving his snowmobile up a slope of only about 20 degrees when he triggered an avalanche. Luckily for him, the shallow angle meant that the avalanche traveled fairly slowly, and he was able to outrun it, just. Usually there was no chance at all of outrunning an avalanche. Regular avalanche paths give themselves away with signs of debris. When avalanche paths run through forest, the clues are fairly easy to spot. Just like a river, an avalanche cuts a path for itself. Where avalanches are frequent, the trees never have a chance to grow, and the track stays clear and bare. Scattered trees along the edge of a track show that this part of the slope is hit less often. The trees have had a few years to grow, It takes a much bigger avalanche to knock them down. Here, fully grown trees have been uprooted, shattered, and splintered. It's the sign of a rare but dramatic event. A huge avalanche that runs down the slope maybe once in 50 years. Evaluating the chances of an avalanche takes skill and experience, even with modern technology. For the forecasters, that means physically seeing what is happening in the snowpack. The techniques are fairly simple, and astonishingly, they've hardly changed in the last 50 years.
Snow surface.
The basic method is to go out to a slope where there's a risk of an avalanche and dig a pit with smooth vertical walls in the snow. Avalanche forecasters do this on a regular basis.
0 to 1 is wind slab.
In one winter, they will dig literally hundreds of snow pits.
Down to 29.
The layers in the snowpack tell them a great deal. Although to the untrained eye, the wall may just look like a mass of snow, these experts can easily distinguish the different layers and how strong or weak they are. They also examine what kind of snow crystals make up each layer, because these are strong indicators of its strength. Experience is all important. The skilled forecaster can tell a lot using a simple magnifying glass.
It's mixed forms, facets going to round, size 1.
The next test is to see how well one layer is bonded onto another. They isolate a column of snow and use a shovel to lever the snow away. The column breaks at the weakest layer.
So let's see if you get a failure on the wind slab. Well, moderate on the crust.
A better test of the stability of the snowpack is to create a small controlled avalanche. A much bigger block of snow is cut and isolated, and the weight of a human body triggers the slide.
Let's do.
The experts use their skill and experience to interpret the results and decide just where the danger areas are on the slope. Their skill can make the difference between life and death. This gray cloud is the most lethal form of avalanche in the world. It comes out of an erupting volcano. It's called a pyroclastic flow. It behaves like a snow avalanche, but it's made up of millions of tons of ash, rocks, and poisonous volcanic gases. This one is rushing down the mountainside of Mount Fugen in southern Japan at 150 miles an hour. Inside the cloud, the temperature is an incredible 1,000 degrees. An even hotter invisible blast wave of air travels in front of the cloud at more than 200 miles an hour. For anyone in the path of this monster, there is no escape. Death is instantaneous. Volcanoes can also produce avalanches of rock and mud. Similar slides can be triggered by earthquakes or simply by instabilities in the rock. Rock avalanches are among the strangest of nature's forces. This one looks like a raging river, but it's pure rock. Giant boulders float on the surface of thousands of tons of solid matter. And sometimes, the whole mountainside can slip slowly downhill. in southern Japan, an entire hillside of earth and rock has become unstable because of heavy rain. Its movement is slow, but unstoppable. Rock slides have brought their share of tragedy. An avalanche of coal waste struck the small mining village of Aberfan in Wales in 1966. The waste pile from the local mine, an entire man-made mountain, collapsed suddenly and without warning. An avalanche of coal ripped through the village school directly in its path. The people here were accustomed to accidents, but underground, in the mines, not in the heart of their community. The Aberfan disaster left a scar on their land and in their memory. That day, 116 children and 28 adults died. When people live in the path of avalanches as large as this, the slide devastates lives and property. In Flateyri in Iceland, an avalanche tore through the town one night in the winter of 1995. The avalanche was completely unexpected. No slide had struck the town in living memory. 50 houses were damaged or destroyed. 20 people died. Around the world, the pressure to settle new land, even in difficult mountainous terrain, is growing. So every year the death toll rises, and avalanches shatter more buildings, property, and lives. The busy ski resort town of Davos in Switzerland lies in the shadow of the Alps. One night in 1968, an avalanche swept down the treeless slopes into the town. It buried houses and cars and killed 53 people. Knowing that one day it would surely happen again, the townspeople began to build. Today, Davos is more protected than any other town in the Alps. On the slopes above the town, fences have been built in the avalanche starting zones, which prevent large areas of uninterrupted snowpack from becoming unstable. The design of these structures must be very precise, positioned at just the right angle to stop the snowpack sliding. They must also be tremendously strong. There are also massive deflection mounds and a catching dam, designed to break up an avalanche's flow and prevent it from reaching the houses below. This kind of defense system can be found all across the Alps. It's expensive, but in this densely populated region, there's little alternative. Even small villages in the Alps have these defense systems. St. Antonian in Switzerland was hit by a series of disastrous avalanches in the 1950s. Dozens of people died. Today, the village is protected by over 40 miles of concrete fencing on the mountain above. It isn't pretty, but it works. Many of the houses also have their own protection, enormous stone wedges built on the upslope side. These force any avalanche that reaches the house into a path on either side. Life in the mountains can never be entirely safe. Avalanches are inevitable. But scientists still hope that one day they will learn enough to predict or perhaps even control them. At the Davos Avalanche Institute in Switzerland, Scientists have spent years analyzing the effects of avalanches on the slopes above the town. Using computer modeling, they can see what happens as temperature, humidity, wind, and a host of other factors gradually modify the snowpack. When this digital avalanche occurs, the computer calculates its progress down the mountain. Others are tackling avalanches using a different approach. Researchers in Zurich, Switzerland found that certain plastic powders running down slopes in water behave very much like snow avalanches in air. They built scale models of mountainsides where big avalanches have occurred and where the details of how the avalanches flowed were known. By studying the flow of the powder down these slopes, they were able to predict where the real avalanches might fall. They were then able to advise local authorities where new houses should and should not be built. But outside the laboratory, the scale and complexity of avalanches still challenges efforts to control them. In remote mountain regions, roads are a lifeline. During the winter months, the risk is substantial. So either the roads must be closed during times of danger, or the avalanche paths cleared out. This is Bear Pass in northern Canada, a remote region with not much traffic. But the road through the pass must be kept clear, and the vehicles safe.
Streets clear. Loading. Hold on.
The solution is a powerful military 105mm recoilless gun. The exploding shells can trigger small avalanches before the snow builds to dangerous levels. If a shell does not trigger a slide, then that particular path is safe, for the moment. The gun fires a huge shell up to 5 miles with great accuracy. From this one position, these highly trained controllers can trigger avalanches on more than 50 known slide paths. Sometimes the avalanche they trigger is bigger than they bargained for. A slide of this size was a disaster waiting to happen. But using the gun has allowed them to choose the timing. Even so, it will be hours before the road can be cleared and the pass once again open to traffic.
Elevation 206.
If a storm produces a dangerous buildup of snow during the night, then that's when these controllers must trigger the avalanches.
0.
They do not need to be able to see the avalanche paths. They've pinpointed the exact coordinates of every path and can fire blindly into the night, knowing that the shells will hit their targets. On busier roads, the risk to traffic increases. The Trans-Canada Highway passes through several avalanche zones in the Canadian Rockies. In some places, large avalanches are so frequent that avalanche sheds are the only answer. These sheds cover and protect the road along the avalanche paths, and the snow slides run right over their roofs. They're incredibly strong concrete structures, built to withstand the huge force of thousands of tons of snow moving at over 100 miles an hour. Avalanche sheds keep the roads clear, but they're very expensive to build. The only practical alternative in most areas is to close the road and clear the snow that's built up on the slopes. Their method is crude but highly effective. Control crews drop large bags of high explosive into the avalanche starting zones. Here, too, they sometimes trigger avalanches bigger than expected. This slide uprooted large 50-year-old trees. The pile of debris was 20 feet high, weighed over 50,000 tons, blocked the Trans-Canada Highway for 75 yards, and took the diggers 4 hours to clear a single lane. It's a graphic reminder of the lethal threat avalanches would pose to traffic without control. Every winter, more and more people go to mountain resorts for sports and recreation. They go on skis, on snowboards, on snowmobiles. Many large resorts like Lake Louise in Canada attract tens of thousands of tourists each winter. There's a great deal of money to be made. But with all these people on the mountain, the threat of avalanches must be taken very seriously.
Relative humidity was 24-hour mean.
So ski resort companies employ avalanche control crews, experts with knowledge of the resort location.
You're going to go with Dave this
These people know when, where, and how the snow behaves in every single avalanche path in the area.
shots. You use them where you need them.
Okay, let's find with Rock Garden.
Well, I don't know. I think it'd be worthwhile closing it. You guys?
Yeah, you bet. Do you think we'll see anything deeper now?
There is great commercial pressure to keep the ski runs open, whatever the weather and whatever the avalanche hazard. So every morning throughout the ski season, the control teams assess the conditions and decide which slopes may be under threat from avalanches that day. As the tourists prepare to enjoy the day, the controllers are already out on the mountains. The most effective way to prevent a large, potentially deadly avalanche is to trigger smaller slides under controlled conditions when there are no skiers in the area. That way, the snowpack never builds up to dangerous levels. One of the methods they use is the Avalancher. It uses compressed air to fire an explosive shell several thousand feet onto the known avalanche starting zones. Depending on the conditions, the control crew may have to trigger avalanches in this one spot dozens of times over the course of a winter.
All clear, safety off, fire, safety on.
But in some situations, the only way to trigger an avalanche is to do the job by hand. This is often the case with cornices, the huge overhangs of snow that build up on ridges hundreds or even thousands of feet above the people skiing on the slopes. They're often out of sight above trees and rocks, but they're a deadly danger and must be knocked down before they grow too big.
What did you throw yesterday?
This is very dangerous work. The control crew use high explosives, which must be handled carefully. It's not easy in the extreme cold and winter wind on the ridgetops. A simple fuse gives the crew time to set the charge, throw it over the edge, and get back to safety. This is where the expertise of these crews is vital.
You got her? Yep. Yeah, where she goes. Let her go.
A mistake placing the charge could easily bring down the wrong part of the cornice. and plunge the control crew themselves down the mountain.
Pull her back up.
Okay.
Got her. Yeah, it's hanging nice too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, got about a minute and a half.
The work of protecting the public from the danger of avalanches is unending. Our best efforts and our most powerful technologies can only barely keep the threat at bay. We know that avalanches will occur, but the complexity of the natural world defeats our attempts to predict or control them. As people push further into nature's once undisturbed domain, they will continue to encounter not just its beauty, but also this savage power of our raging planet.